Hello, welcome to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, where it is all about helping amazing physicians just like you create a wealthy life free from burnout and with the financial security to practice medicine on your own terms. I'm your host, Dr. Elisa Zhang. Hello, and welcome back to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. I've been wanting to do a podcast episode on the gender pay gap for a long time, but I always felt like I would need to do a lot of research to get all the facts correct because I know that there's going to be at least some backlash. I've had an argument with a white male physician colleague who I otherwise like and respect over the existence of the gender pay gap existing in medicine. Many people will cite that physicians are paid based on RVUs or collections, so they are really all compensated according to the same rules. However, when you look at the research, the only place in medicine where the gender pay gap does not exist is in residency and fellowship training programs, and potentially radiology departments. More on that later. I can't say that I've done an exhaustive search of all the research regarding the physician gender pay gap, but I've read some compelling research articles that tells me it still exists. It affects the ability of women physicians to build wealth. Being a woman myself, despite not having any children, I can tell you that I have definitely been underpaid. I have worked part-time for the last 2 years, but that has been to free up time in order to pursue other sources of income, like real estate investing and my coaching business. I made more last year working part-time than I previously made working full-time, which tells you when I was full-time, I was definitely underpaid. So I'd like to open up the conversation about the gender pay gap. Traditionally, it's been the man's role to take care of the family financially, and a woman's income for a long time has just been considered supplemental. In 1850, about 15% of women worked outside the home, and these jobs would have typically been as nurses or governesses. If they worked in a factory, it would have been as a seamstress or working on apparel. This was seen more as women's type of work. They may also work in domestic service in the home of others, like as a cook or cleaning or some other caretaking type role or household role. Basically, women working were still in caregiving roles or doing housework. It wasn't until World War I that women held jobs traditionally held by men in large numbers. But of course, this was due to men being unavailable. The men were off at war, but factories needed to continue to produce to aid the war effort. So that was a time when women were allowed to step into traditionally male roles. When the men returned home from war, women were also expected to return to the actual home. Depending on what research you look at, the actual gender pay gap somewhat varies, but the current gender wage gap is that women typically make somewhere around 82 cents on the dollar compared to men. Women are also the first to give up their work to take over caregiving responsibilities at home. This was made very clear during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. Between March and April of 2020, 3.5 million mothers of school-aged children left work, lost their jobs, or exited the labor market. The percentage of women who left or lost their jobs was 30% higher than the number of men in 2020. What does the gender pay gap look like in medicine? It actually looks worse, unfortunately, than if you compare it to the general population across the United States. According to the 2020 U.S. Census Bureau, the physician gender pay gap was 26%. Those are raw numbers based on reported income and profession. There are reasons why, on average, women physicians make less than men. Data suggests that medical specialty and factors such as hours worked, type of work, and location contribute to gender pay gaps. Women physicians are more likely than men to work part-time. One study found that within 6 years of completing training, 22.6% of women physicians were not working full-time compared to 3.6% of men physicians. For those with children, the gap is even larger, with 30.6% of women not working full-time compared to 4.6% of men. 77.5% of currently working part-time or those who are not actually working at all stated that family was really the factor that influenced their decision regarding how much they work. A report in academic medicine noted that women are more represented in lower paying specialties like pediatrics and far less represented in highly compensated specialties like surgery. Orthopedics and neurosurgery are among the highest paying specialties, and these specialties continue to be dominated by men. That being said, the gender wage gap in medicine does occur within a specialty, so the overall gender wage gap is not based on specialty choice. There are significant pay disparities by gender within medical specialties. According to a 2018 survey data from Medscape, male specialists made $358,000 annually on average, which is 36% more than the $263,000 average salary among female specialists, an absolute difference of $95,000. The difference is also found in primary care, though not quite as large. In primary care, men make on average $239,000, which is 18% more than women who earn $203,000 on average, a difference of $36,000. Another study, which adjusted for variables including specialty, location, and years of experience, found that women doctors in 2022 earn nearly $110,000 less per year than men physicians across the United States. In fact, the gender pay gap is so strong that as more women became physicians and started to dominate certain specialties, the compensation for the entire specialty actually decreased, even for men within that specialty. This was a phenomenon that I heard about years ago, so I don't have the original citation or article of where it comes from, but I could imagine that being true. The example stated at the time was for OBGYNs. While OBGYN is a specialty now dominated by women, there was a time when there were no women physicians, so all OBGYNs were men. Apparently, as more and more women enter the field of OBGYN, even the men saw that their compensation was decreasing when they entered OBGYN. To review a little historical context, Elizabeth Blackwell is the first woman in the United States to earn a medical degree, which occurred in 1849. However, the barrier for entering medical school for women was still quite high for a very long time. Data from the Association of American Medical Colleges, the AAMC, shows that for the academic year of 1980 to 1981, 25% of medical school graduates were women and 75% were men. The percentage of women medical school graduates rose gradually from 1981 until it reached 49.3% in 2007 to 2008. If we then look 10 years later, in 2018, 64.1% of physicians were male and 35.8% of physicians were female, with older physicians more likely being male. In 2018, looking at all white physicians under the age of 35, 50.6% were women and 49.4% were men, really showing that in the newer generation, the ratio of women and men physicians was approximately equal. The most comprehensive study I found was published in 2016 and compared 10,241 physician salaries at 24 public medical schools and found that a difference in earnings exists between men and women physicians, even after accounting for age, experience, specialty, faculty rank, and measures of research productivity, as well as clinical revenue. Among the 10,241 physicians, 3,549 were female, which is in line with the gender differential across all physicians. Again, when you look at older physicians, there are more male physicians due to the lag of how long it takes for us to be in training and at the point where women and men were equal in medical schools. The unadjusted mean salary of male physicians was $257,957 compared to $206,641 for women physicians, a difference of $51,315, which was found to be statistically significant within a 95% confidence interval. After making adjustments for multiple factors, the difference between men and women was in earnings of $247,661 for men compared to $227,783 for women, a difference of $19,878, which was also statistically significant at the 95% confidence interval. In all specialties, with the exception of radiology, the estimated adjusted salary among men exceeded that of women, and this difference was statistically significant in 9 of 18 specialties. Surgical subspecialties show the largest gender differential, with other statistically significant differences found in orthopedic surgery, hematology oncology, OBGYN, and cardiology. The gap was also largest for full professors, where the adjusted salary of female full professors being comparable to those of male associate professors, which is one level down, and those of female associate professors being comparable to those of male assistant professors. I know this study is still 8 years old, but I don't believe that there's been a great change in the last 8 years. Another study found that over a simulated 40-year career, women physicians are estimated to earn $2 million less than men after adjustment for factors that may otherwise explain observed differences in income, such as hours worked, clinical revenue, practice type, and specialty. That income difference is after adjusting for number of hours worked or time taken off. And yet we do know that women are more likely to work part-time as well as take off for things like maternity leave. When you add that into the mix, women are likely to make even less than men over the course of their careers. The reasons for the gender pay gap are nuanced and complicated, but there are some likely explanations. Women are less likely than men to negotiate an offered salary, and even when women do negotiate, they typically ask for 30% less than men. Women are also 25% less likely than men to ask for a specific amount when negotiating a pay raise. Women tend to believe that they will be rewarded for hard work, but the truth is, everyone is busy getting their own work done, and it's unlikely people are really recognizing the extra work other people are doing. People are more likely to notice the person who's not doing the work, the person that people end up putting in more work for in order to pick up that other person's slack. You're not going to get recognized for being the last car in the parking lot every day. You've got to be vocal about the work you're doing and the value you're bringing to the table and why you should be compensated about it. That's what increases compensation. Actually touting what your accomplishments are and what value you're bringing, which women are also less likely to do. All physicians do some uncompensated work, but women are also much more likely to do uncompensated work compared to men, as well as do work that does not lead to promotions or increased income. While I couldn't find specific research supporting this claim among physicians, this is certainly true among women in general. An article in the Harvard Business Review cites studies of industry and academia by Irene de Palter and colleagues, Sarah Mitchell and Vicky Hazley, and Joya Mirza and colleagues, as well as many others, which have shown systemic gender differences in how work is allocated. These studies really show that women spend relatively more time than men on non-promotable tasks and less time on promotable ones. Research also showed that women were 48% more likely to volunteer than men in situations where volunteering had a monetary penalty. There was also a research study where they placed people in situations where volunteering actually had a penalty. In these studies, they found that women were 48% more likely than men to volunteer in these situations when in a group of men and women. In contrast, women were no more likely to volunteer than men when everyone was in a same-sex group. So if a woman was in a group of all women, then they weren't necessarily more likely to volunteer. In single-sex groups, men knew that they had to step forward if they wanted to find a volunteer, and women expected other women to volunteer. What was interesting is that in women's group, the volunteering ends up being shared equally across different women in different rounds of the experiment, where in men's groups, it tended to fall on the same men each time. In another experiment, women received 44% more requests to volunteer than men in mixed-sex groups. Women are also more likely to say yes than men, with women saying yes 76% of the time compared to men saying yes 51% of the time. Doing work that doesn't help actually receive promotions and therefore increase pay with those promotions, or doing more non-compensated work really seems to fall more on women than men. This phenomenon is also highlighted by another study, which found a difference in income between men and women OBGYNs. In this study, the differences appeared to come from supplemental income from research or additional clinical pay rather than huge gaps in base pay. This suggests that men take on responsibilities that actually are better compensated or more compensated compared to women who are taking on responsibilities that are less likely to be compensated. Unfortunately, we are probably still far away from closing the unadjusted gender wage gap due to women's role as caretakers being such a strong part of our society. However, there are some things that we women can do, like negotiating to increase our income and saying no to uncompensated work. We could also negotiate to be compensated when asked to do uncompensated work. For more on negotiating, I highly recommend the Simply Worth It podcast, hosted by Linda Street. Dr. Linda Street was also a guest on episode 35 of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. Women typically have greater barriers compared to men for building wealth, not only the gender wage gap, but also due to the messaging we receive from society around our ability to actually make money and create wealth, as well as just the ability to manage and invest money. By understanding these barriers, we can find ways to overcome them. It's not a zero-sum game. Women making more doesn't mean that men have to make less. Women can also benefit from the support of men in closing the gender wage gap. So if you're a man and listening to this episode, please understand that I'm not male bashing in any way. Women need men supporters to help bridge this gap, and I hope that you will be a woman supporter. It's not women versus men, it's creating an equitable environment for everybody. Thank you so much for being a listener of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. If you love this podcast, please, please, please take 2 minutes and leave a 5-star review with Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you are using. It really helps get the word out, and I personally would truly appreciate it. Have a great week, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could share it with your friends and colleagues. And now for the disclaimer. I am not a certified financial planner, accountant, or attorney, and nothing I say should be construed as professional investment, tax, or legal advice. This show is primarily for your education and entertainment. I am a physician, but I'm probably not your physician. So if you need any medical advice, please contact your own physician. Thank you.